Hey guys, this is Danny.
And this is Jenny Fuentes.
And this is Dear Husband, Dear Wife.
Yes, it is a podcast that is about an imperfect couple keeping it 100% real. Where we talk about dating, marriage, and sex.
Yeah, all of it.
Yes, it is unscripted
And
it's centered in the truth.
Yes, we talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, the messed up, the shady, the pretty things, the beautiful things. All of it.
All.
Jam-packed.
Yes. So thank you for tuning in. And
We
get
hope.
ready.
Yeah.
We hope what?
I don't know. We just hope. We just hope.
We just hope that you will enjoy the episode that you're about to hear.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. Enjoy.
Hello, my name is Danny Fuentes. This is Jenny Fuentes, and we have a special guest speaker today, Jessica Skupian.
Woo!
Enter fake applause.
Yay!
Yeah, Jessica Skupian is a life and leadership coach specializing in helping people get unstuck and make conscious choices aligned with the person they want to be, the life they want to live, and the impact they were created to make in the world. She lives in Austin, Texas, so we are very privileged to have her zooming in with us today in this recording with her husband of 12 years, Michael, and their 5-year-old son, Everett. Fun fact about Jessica, outside of work, you are most likely to find her floating in a river, playing board games with her son, having philosophical conversations with her husband, and or listening to Taylor Swift. So if you're a Swiftie, yay! Jessica, thank you so much.
And I did all 4 of those things this week.
Whoa! Did you go to the concert?
Nice.
I did go to her concert, a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So welcome to Dear Husband, Dear Wife, and thank you so much for making space and time to be with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Jess, do you want to just start off by just sharing a little bit about, obviously I just read a little bit about yourself, but anything else that you wanted to, what's your heart behind our conversation today? What is it that you're really excited to talk to us about and share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been married for 12 years, like you shared, and we have had a lot of experiences in those 12 years. My husband was in the military, so we've had that experience of moving around, having uncertainty, being separated from each other. We've had experiences with infertility. Our son is really miraculous, so we're so grateful for him. And then we had the experience of me becoming a coach, which really changed the dynamic of our relationship. And then also my husband retiring from the military and going to school for psychology to become a clinical psychologist. So that has really shifted our overall dynamic. And one of the things that I'm most passionate about now is this idea of collaborating with each other and viewing ourselves as on the same team, working towards a common goal. Because for many of those 12 years, it kind of felt like we were not just on different teams, but we were on different trains that were on different tracks heading in opposite directions. And it feels like, by God's grace, we finally are running on parallel tracks.
We've been there.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's the story of marriage, right? Sometimes you're learning how to collaborate with each other at first, at the beginning, and then sometimes, God, I just love marriage in general because I think God does delight in marriages and he does have a plan for marriages, and it's a very restorative story all the time. And so we are very excited to hear your story and how you can be blessing the listeners today that are listening to this. So let us start with your first question that we have for you. It's how has being a coach, because you did mention that you are a coach, how has being a coach impact your marriage?
So one of the primary ways that it impacted our marriage is that it introduced the idea that we and we alone are responsible for our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. I think one of the core themes, and my husband would likely attest to this, is that I have this propensity to blame him for anything bad that might be going on. And when I went through my coach training program, just like a core foundational coaching philosophy is that our beliefs create our feelings, and our feelings create our behaviors and actions, and our actions and behaviors over time create outcomes. And so that just created an opportunity for us to get curious around how were we contributing to the outcomes that we were experiencing with our own thoughts and beliefs. And no one can make you think or believe anything except for yourself, really. And so that was a really productive shift for us.
Wow. That's very powerful to even just have those skills to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Sorry. My bad. So, Jessica, I love and appreciate what you were saying. As a life coach, you've also kind of gained those skills to be able to communicate with your husband, but also you did mention that your husband's going to school, right, to be a clinical psychologist. And I wanted to just ask you, how has that also impacted on your shift? Because Danny's about to start school and also going to school to become a licensed clinical psychologist. So how has that impacted your relationship? And what are some tools that you guys have learned together as a coach, and also probably on his end that you've learned from him that can be very good tools that we can just learn as couples?
Yeah, well, first of all, Danny, congrats.
Thank you.
On that impending journey. It's so needed. Gosh, it's so needed and increasingly needed to have trained psychologists, therapists, etc. I think that one of the biggest impacts of my husband going to school is that he was finally learning firsthand some of these concepts that I learned through my coaching experience that I've sort of been talking about. But now he was having his own context to really understand it himself and then apply those learnings to our marriage. I've always said that marriage is a container in which you work out your junk, right? It's just this, God brings together often people who are completely different from one another, and often our strengths can complement one another. And also when we are operating not at our best self, then our weaknesses tend to exacerbate one another. And so having him to really be able to understand this for his own self, and combining that with me being a coach actually provides a container in which we can experiment with the ideas that we're learning, right? With the concepts that we're learning. So marriage doesn't just become the container in which we can work out our junk, but it becomes a container in which we can practice new ways of being and learn from those new ways of being and iterate on those new ways of being. And one of the primary concepts that we have really been trying to implement in our life, and I would say that my husband is really one of the greater proponents of this, is the idea that we have shared goals, right? Like that we actually do share values and desires and a vision for our life. And when we can approach challenges through that lens of having a shared goal and being on the same team and avoiding blame, looking at myself, then we can create far better outcomes than when we're on quote unquote opposing teams. And that's really been a game changer for our marriage.
That's awesome. I mean,
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And you kind of already tapped into the second question that we wanted to ask you about, which was like, why is it so important for couples to have a common goal and vision? I think we forget. I think young couples now are getting excited of the idea of marriage, or there is this, or some people are not even excited about marriage, right? But we're talking, obviously, for the sake of the listeners who are listening to this podcast, it's because they're excited either of marriage or want to get married or are in a relationship. But a lot of the times we get blindsided by the wedding and the honeymoon phase and everything that we totally forget to take into consideration, really like a life vision as a couple. And what does that look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 15 years from now, right? To apply those things. And So I really appreciate you saying that. And I do want to ask you, how can we as married couples benefit from having a common goal and vision?
Yeah. And I would say that it is relevant to your vision as at a macro level for your family. Like, what kind of family do we want to be? What are our shared values? But it also is really helpful on a micro level. And so let me just share this silly little example that I think encapsulates the value, both the drawback of being on separate teams and the value of being on the same team. So we were having this situation where every time we left our house, we would get into a mini argument about who is going to lock the door. Because I have my key for both the house and my car in my wallet. So it's all one contained thing. And in order to open my car, I need to have my car key next to the car, which means that I can't lock the door because I'm always the first one who left. So my husband would always say, "Hey, I need the keys." And then my response would be, "Well, bring your own damn keys." But he didn't want to bring his keys because they were bulky and I already had my keys. So it was this dilemma where I would get frustrated every time because he would want my keys, but I would need my keys and he wouldn't bring his own keys. So in that situation, when my perspective was focused on the fact that we had different goals, right? My goal was to get in the car and turn on the car, and his goal was to not carry keys. Right? It just created a scenario in which we were always annoyed with one another and blaming each other. And just the simple experience of leaving the house would lead to conflict. But my husband, because his new focus is to apply this concept of being on the same team and identifying the shared goal and working towards a common solution, he was able to step back eventually and ask, what is actually our goal here? And the goal is to get out of the house and have the door locked. The goal had nothing to do with the keys. And so when he really thought about, well, what are other ways that we could get out of the house, get the car turned on, and lock the door with only one set of keys, a very obvious solution presented itself, which was that we just got an electronic keypad. So whenever we leave, he just punches a button and it locks itself, and I can go and turn on the car. And when he brought that idea up to me, I just had to laugh at the absurdity of how many weeks we took just arguing about carrying two sets of keys because we were focused on the problem instead of focusing on our shared goal and creating a creative solution to achieve that shared goal. So it matters at a macro level, but it matters on a really micro, day-to-day shared experience level to focus on what is it that we're really trying to achieve here, and how can we create a solution that benefits both of us in service of our shared goal versus arguing about the problem and who's to blame for the problem.
Yep.
Who would have thought a keypad would save your marriage?
Exactly. Who would have thought? But the keypad telling you what's up.
Awesome.
Sure. Next question is... Oh, sorry, Jenny.
Well, you haven't mentioned ego yet, but I do know that you do focus on ego. I did read, by the way, if you have not signed up for Jessica's newsletter, you're going to want to sign up for her newsletter.
Put your ego aside and sign up to her newsletter.
But can you tell us a little bit in the midst of like coaching, and there was this newsletter that you wrote about how our egos tend to get in our way. And we often hear people talking about egos. And so can you tell us a little bit more on how, first and foremost, define what ego is and what you mean by that? And then second of all, just tell us how those egos or our ego impacts our relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I would define ego is our perception about what is true about ourselves and also what is not true about ourselves, and what we need other people to believe is true about us versus not true about us. So you can think of our ego as sort of this shell that is only defined by what it likes and dislikes, what it thinks is good and what it thinks is bad, what it thinks is appropriate and inappropriate. There's no actual solid core to an ego. It only exists relative to its preferences. And so our ego has a significant influence in our relationships because being in relationship with other humans has a tendency to trigger our ego, right? Because when our ego gets triggered, when we perceive that someone is suggesting that something that we believe is true about ourselves is not, or they're suggesting that something that we believe is not true about ourselves is in fact true. And so I'll just use a personal example. The way that my ego gets triggered a lot is if I feel that I am not being respected, because that's an important part of my ego, is to feel respected. So whenever my husband engages with me in a way that I feel like he's disrespecting me, then my ego immediately flares and I get really angry and defensive. Because I've been doing this work for a long time, I can now recognize that quicker and take a step back and ask, what am I believing to be true? To what extent is my ego being triggered right now? Oh, yep, there it is, being triggered. Okay, now I can take a step back and think more rationally and engage from a place of true self, whole self, integrated self, versus this fragile ego self. But even though, I've done the work for a long time, that doesn't prevent my ego from getting triggered. It just means that I can recognize it and sort of redirect faster than I used to be able to do. But I would say for all of the folks listening, whenever you feel yourself getting offended, it's likely that your ego is being triggered in some way. Something that you believe is true about you is being suggested to not be true, or something you believe is not true about you is being suggested as true. And in that moment, you can simply take a step back and ask yourself, what am I believing to be true? How true is that really? And what are alternative beliefs that I could choose in this moment that would better serve me and help me to achieve my desired outcome here, which is likely to have harmony in my relationship versus digging in and perpetuating the argument that I'm in right now.
Don't trigger me, dog.
No, that's actually really good. Wow, it's like,
No.
I mean, I know I and Jess, probably you, I don't know if you've seen this with people that you've worked with or clients that you've worked with, but as women, we tend to play more of a humbling, I'm not getting triggered, or I'm not, or at least I can speak for myself. I'm going to speak for myself. Like I've noticed where my ego gets hurt, and I know it does, but I pretend that it doesn't. And the truth of the matter is, it's like also neglecting that and not addressing that has also kind of build up resentment sometimes, and it will build up resentment easily with Danny, right? And I'll be like, you just, for example, even last night, we came back from traveling from LA for my birthday, and we were both exhausted. We were both tired, and we were watching a show. And Danny they don't show who the lady that was.
So we're watching this show. I think it's called Hijack on Apple TV. And there's a plane gets hijacked, and the passengers believe that the people hijacking the plane are not using real bullets in their guns. So at some point, like, there's an indicator that someone's been shot, because the camera cuts to like the floor of the plane, and there's like blood and bullet cap. And then Jenny's like, oh, it's this one lady. And I was like, how do you know? And she's like, oh, because she's not in her seat. I was like, but I've been watching this same show with you, and I haven't seen her, nor has there been a scene where she gets shot. So how do you know that it's her? And she's like, because she's not in her seat. I'm like, okay. What is it? That doesn't mean that she got shot. She's like, you didn't see the book and the thing that she was holding, like, in the previous episode? I was like, yeah, but still, like, I mean, I'm looking at the same show as you are. Like, I still haven't seen her get shot. And then we're basically kind of going at it. And she's like, oh, yeah, but she got shot. And then there's like literally like a glimpse of a body being stuffed into one of the bathrooms. But you can't, again, you can't really tell who it is. All you see is like a slight forehead kind of move, and then you see the bullet hole. But again, there's no indicator that it was this woman that Jenny extremely knows, like the back of her hand, is the one that got shot.
And this is where my ego kicks in. I needed to be right. And
And I was like, but Jenny, like, how do you know? And, we just kept going at it. And I was like, I still haven't seen her get shot. How do you know that it's her? And so she got upset because I did get a little, like, I kind of got jumpy, like saying, stop assuming that you know, because you don't know, because I don't know. And we're both watching the same thing at the same time.
So hence, ego's kicking in, right? On his end, he doesn't know, and he doesn't like the fact that I know, or quote unquote, I think I know. In my end, I needed to be right, and I needed to say, I do know, and therefore... And then that creates a little argument, and just for no reason, right? So,
yeah.
For no reason. I would say like 90% of arguments are rooted in absolute nonsense, as your example.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's not really rooted in nonsense because it's not really about the show. Right? There's a thing beneath the thing there. And I wonder for you, Jenny, is it really about the need to be right? Or is there something else there? And I would tie that back to your Enneagram type, because our egos are perpetuated by our Enneagram types. So it just makes me wonder, what is it about a type 2 that was showing up in that moment?
Wow. So true. And I need to reflect on that. Now I have some work to do.
But then I would ask the same thing of Danny. What is it about Jenny feeling like she really knew that felt triggering to you?
It was the thought of like, it was a thought of like, how is it that you know something that I don't know, yet we're both in the same rhythm, both in the same groove, whatever. We're watching the same thing, haven't seen, more than we have, or, Jenny hasn't seen it, farther than I have, so it's like, so that was my thing. My thing was like, if I don't know, how the hell do you know?
Yeah. And maybe, should I also know if you know?
Yeah, that's also it too. So it's like, yeah, it was that moment.
And he is an Enneagram 6, so security, like having to be certain of certain things, or like having to be 100% sure is like big on Danny. So if it's ambiguous,
we're having data points, right? Like tangible, factual data points, not just a gut feeling.
Yep. Yeah. And I'm a very gut person.
She's a gut person.
Yep. Wow. So lots to learn about our egos, and definitely how they impact our relationships and why they are important to also acknowledge and address in our marriages, right? Or in our relationships. And speaking of, related to the subject of egos and shared goals and visions, what work can we personally do? So for example, if Danny and I were having a session with you, right? Or anything like that, can you give us a little bit of an insight of like, what can we personally do to support each other, like our partners and ourselves, into shifting mindsets and becoming more aware of our egos? Like, can you give us a tangible example or a quick practice that we can apply right now, especially for our listeners who are listening right now? Like, what can they do in order to start shifting that mindset and actually being able to address that aspect of egos or even life goal visions?
So I would say for both of you, knowing your Enneagram types, that's a really helpful place to start, because you can simply gain more insight into the elements of your type's ego structure. So what is it that a type 2 believes is really true about them? And what is it that an Enneagram type 2 would never want to be true about them? So just gaining that awareness, and same thing for a six. What does a six believe is always true and is never true? And then the greatest gift that you can give to your spouse is simply being willing to do your own work and become more self-aware. So when you are feeling whatever triggering is normal for you, right? Whether that's you want to start clenching your fist, or your chest is feeling tight, or your blood feels like it's starting to boil, or you want to run away, or you want to fight, whatever that normal habituated triggering is for you, start becoming aware of when that's actually happening. And then be willing to just take a pause, whether that's in your own head, whether you have to leave the room for a minute, and simply ask, what am I believing to be true? And to what extent is that reflective of my ego messages? And if it is reflective of my ego messages, then what might it look like to just release that, right? You can even visually in your mind, visualize you actually moving away from your ego, right? If you sort of personify your ego, just gaining space from it and asking, what could also be true in this moment? Because our ego says this is always true and that is never true. So for example, if my ego is saying I'm a competent person, which means that I'm never incompetent, but that part of my ego is being triggered, then I could say, well, when are times where I actually have been a little incompetent, right? Just being able to acknowledge the things that the ego says are not true as true helps to create space as well. And then entering back into that conversation from a place of rationality and willingness to acknowledge what is actually true. That's really, I think, the greatest gift that you can give to any relationship, never mind your spouse. But it starts with becoming aware of what those ego elements are. And if you don't know your Enneagram type, that's totally fine. If you're anti-Enneagram, that's fine as well. You could just make a list of responses to two questions. The first question being, what do I believe is 100% true about me? And what would feel really terrible if someone said was true about me? Just make those two lists. And then anytime you're feeling triggered, you could go back to that list and ask, well, which of those columns are being activated right now? And then take a step back from that. And just being able to acknowledge, gosh, I'm really sorry my ego was being triggered. That is one of the hardest things that a human being can say.
Always.
Because our ego is like, no, I'm not going to acknowledge my very presence. Never mind that, I was maybe a little bit wrong there. So if you can say, hey, I'm sorry, my ego is being triggered, that's a game changer in any relationship.
Wow.
So much wisdom.
Yeah, it's intense.
Oh, I feel so blessed to even have this conversation with you, Jess. And then I think sometimes having that hard conversation can be really tough. Like willing to have hard conversations with our partners can just be hard, right? Admitting that we were wrong, or admitting that we're right, or admitting, in my case, sometimes like telling Denny, this is what's bothering me, right? This is being vulnerable, I guess is the word I'm going to use, can be really hard sometimes, even though I trust him, even though I love him, and I know he loves me and he trusts me. Just having those hard conversations can be tough at times, admitting that our egos are being hurt, or actually this is a part of me that I don't like about myself and I'm working on this area, right? So are there any action steps that you recommend that we can take in order to pursue some understanding and reconciliation, especially when both of our egos have been both really hurt at this time, or when we're both hurting, or when we're both not seeing eye to eye or understanding each other, I guess you can kind of say, because sometimes there's that moment in relationships where you're just not understanding with each other. So is there something that you recommend, an action step that we can take in order to pursue understanding and reconciliation, and why that is important in our marriages?
So one of the core concepts that underlies our ability to achieve reconciliation through modeling is the idea that energy attracts like energy. So whatever energy that we're putting out into the world is likely to be mirrored back to us by the person that we're engaging with. And that's what escalates arguments, right? If we come in really hot, then the other person is automatically going to get defensive and either run away or fight back. But the same is actually true when we model humility, right? If you walk out of the room and you check in with yourself and realize that your ego is flaring, and you come back in and you're willing to say, hey, I'm sorry. I recognize that my ego is flaring right then. I wonder if we can have a different conversation. You are offering the opportunity to shift the overall energy. And I would say never underestimate the power and impact of humility. I would say 9.5 out of 10 times when my husband comes back and is like, hey, I'm sorry, and I can feel a palpable shift in his energy, it automatically shifts my energy. It automatically brings my defenses down. And so just as we can escalate an argument through our own actions and energy, we can de-escalate an argument through our own actions and energy as well, in a way that doesn't require the other person to come to the table. My husband, when we first got married, he would always quote the, scripture to never let the sun go down on your anger. And so he would always insist that we worked out our stuff. And Danny, you're shaking your head right now, and I totally agree. It drove me nuts.
The sun's going down on this anger.
Years. And I'm like, that's a bunch of nonsense, because I still have feelings, and that's an artificial resolution if we just make up before we go to bed. I'm going to pause there and say, Danny, is there something that you would like to contribute to the thought that you would like to share?
No. I was just agreeing with you, because that was Jenny. Like, we'd stay up till like 3 in the morning and we got to fix this now. And then I'd be like, Jenny, we have to go to work. And she'd be like, no, we need to fix this. And I'm like, Jenny, death sounds sweeter right now than anything. And she's like, no, we got to fix this. It's like, I agree with you. Yeah. And it's one of those things, like, I mean, I've heard a lot of people say, like, yeah, don't go to bed angry. And like after 11 years, it's kind of, to me, it's like, if you going to sleep upset will probably give you the opportunity to wake up the next morning and you're cool, and it's like, you know what, you're not bickering at each other, and it's like, do that, at least for us, like, we're not ones to try to do that, but there had been moments in our past where it's like, you know what, like, I just have to go to sleep. Like, I'm too upset, too angry. I can't think right. I can't, like, process anything straight. At this point, like, it was just, I agree with you. Like, yeah, throwing, like, biblical scriptures of, like, you produce no fruit, therefore you die kind of thing. It's like, yes, I will die right now.
And I've come to understand that sentiment from a more holistic perspective, as in it's less about night and day, because I completely agree with you. Sometimes you just actually need a break. And I say this to my husband all the time. I'm like, when you allow me to go away into another room and have time, then because I'm an internal processor, I will actually often come to the conclusion that I'm at fault here or accountable in some way. And then I'll come back out humbly and, ask for, maybe not for forgiveness, but I'll acknowledge my part. And if you don't give me that space, then I'm just going to keep getting more angry, because I don't have that mental processing time, because I'm an internal processor where he's an external processor. And so he's working it out as we're talking. But as we're talking, it's just making me more angry. So I completely agree. Sometimes we just need space and time. Yeah. And I don't believe in artificially fixing something so that you can check the box of the sun not setting on your anger. Yeah. And that being said, I think the wisdom in that perspective is that we can also have a tendency to just sweep things under the rug and never address them, and or just stew in resentment because we're not actually addressing it. And there's, as I was preparing for this conversation, was just looking up, scriptures on anger. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in James 1:19 through 20. It says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce righteousness that God desires. And I think that that's true from my own experience. When I sit in my anger, I just get further convinced that I'm right and that he's wrong and he's to blame and he's an idiot. And if only he could see my perspective, then everything would be fine. And so I think there is wisdom in taking time away to consider your part and then coming back together to create actual reconciliation, so that you're not creating further resentment, which then leads to entrenched bitterness over time.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's necessarily constrained to a particular time of the day.
Wow. No, I agree with you. It's always helpful to just have that break. And we've learned that too throughout the years, where it's like Jenny was always the kind of person to function as like, we have to get this fixed right now. We could be going to a birthday party for the family and, you know, we're like going at it. And then she's like, we got to fix this now. And, you know, as time has passed, we've both learned like, hey, like we don't think straight when we're that upset. So it's like, you know, let's give each other a break. I remember I would literally just leave the house and I'd just go walk in circles like an idiot. And I'd come back, but it's like I'm calm, I'm collective, and like you said, you know, it would give me the opportunity to really think like, okay, what did I say that obviously got to her? You know, what did she say that got to me, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was easier for me to, you know, to admit, okay, this is where I dropped the ball, and rather than Jenny's wanting to fix it right there and then, and I can't think straight, so my anger is elevating at a much higher rate. So. Yeah.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
So much to learn, so much wisdom in actually being patient and being slow to anger. I think if anything, taking breaks I've learned that. So for anyone who's listening, if you are an external processor like myself and like Jessica's husband, give them space for our internal processors. Like, I think they feel respected, they feel heard, they feel also loved and appreciated because we are giving them space. And for us external processors, if you're an internal processor, just be patient with us and remind us to say, hey, I need space. Like, I want to talk to you about this, and assure us. I think if anything, it's like assuring us we do want to talk about this and we do need to talk about this. I'm just really angry right now. And if I'm angry right now, I'm probably going to say the wrong things. So communicating that very clearly is going to be so important for us external processors to hear that. So we understand it's like, okay, he or she is not ignoring me. He or she does want to address this, but he or she also needs space. Therefore, I'm going to grant them space, knowing that in return, I'm going to get what I need as an external processor to be able to process this in the right mindset.
Yeah. We were just remembering that however anybody is showing up has very little, if anything, to do with you, and has everything to do with themselves. And the more that you can just be really transparent about, this is what's happening for me. I'm an internal processor, therefore I need to go away and internally process so that we can achieve, going full circle, our shared goal here, which is to bring reconciliation and restoration of peace and harmony to our relationship. This is not about me abandoning you. This has nothing to do with you at all. This is what I need. And I recognize that you need to process too. So when I come back, you can have all the space that you need to process through. And maybe while I'm internally processing, you go and talk out loud to yourself. But I think that having that acknowledgement of this is simply what's happening and it has nothing to do with you, other person, is really helpful too. So that all of those stories that human beings have the propensity to make up that often don't reflect well on each other don't need to grow.
Good stuff. Wow.
Wow. Yes. Yeah. Wow. Jess, thank you so much for your time. Honestly, like, I know.
Now I'm going to throw Bible verses at my wife.
No, but I really appreciate you sharing and spending time with us. And honestly, right before we go, we're a little bit over time, but I do want to just create the space. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we end? Is there anything else that's in your heart, or you're like, hey, like, anything you want to advise couples that are either looking to get married or are married, or anything like that. I mean, you don't have to, obviously, but if you're like, hey, this is good, we'll end here.
I would say two things. Being married is hard. Being single is hard. Being divorced is hard. Being a human in any form of relationship is naturally hard because we're broken and sinful people. And I think it's important to normalize that even if you are struggling in whatever relationship status that you're in, that is normal and a shared experience by most other people. And also that if you are in relationship with any other person, whether that's your spouse, your partner, your boyfriend or girlfriend, your boss, your mother, whomever, anytime that you can identify a shared goal that you have, shared value, shared priority, shared preference, and align yourself on the same team as opposed to on opposing teams, you have a much higher likelihood of being able to collaboratively work together towards achieving that shared thing. And 10 out of 10 times, you will have a better outcome when you shift your perspective towards shared goal, shared team. We're in this together and trying to create something that mutually benefits both of us. If you take away nothing else, then that is the most important thing.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jess.
Thank you a lot.
We feel very lucky and honored.
Thank you for sharing your insight and your experience into to our lives and anybody else listening.
Yeah. So I will be sharing in our podcast bio how you can get in touch with Jessica if you wanted to reach out to her to learn more about what she has to offer as a life coach. She is phenomenal. I've had the honor and the privilege of also just knowing Jessica through a coaching cohort that we did. And honestly, she's pure gold. So I don't know if you're looking for new clients, Jess, but if you are, like, she is pure gold. So I do recommend you signing up for her newsletter. I'll put that in our podcast bio, and you will hear all about that and all the information that you need for her. So, Jess, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate you, and we pray blessings over you and your son and your marriage and your husband, and we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you just for what you're doing for all of the relationships out there. It's super needed. So thank you both.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Hey guys, thank you so much again for listening to the episode and for tuning in to the podcast. Again, I hope that the episodes and the podcast are encouraging. I hope that it brings you guys new light, new perspective, a new approach to the marriages, to relationships. We hope that it gives you guys the right tools to be able to move forward and how it fits best for you.
Yeah, and if you have any questions or you want more details, just go ahead and follow us on Instagram at our Instagram handle, which is Danny and Jenny, or email us at contact@dannyandjenny.com. We look forward to
hearing from you.
Yeah, and to the next episode.
Awesome.
All right.
Take care.
Adios.